Hello, my name is Jeff Hicks, and I'm going to sit down and tell a few stories about Chad Hall. We spent some time together working as missionaries for the LDS Church. I guess that's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints now. But we served together on Yap Island for the better part of 8 months. And we got to know each other pretty well in the MTC. And so this is going to be just a little bit of storytelling. And I'm off script here, so I'll try not to drag it out and say and ah too many times. But anyway, I hope you'll like this. I don't know how much Chad talked about our missions, but we had some great experiences together, and I think those stories are worth retelling. So I hope you enjoy them. Here we go. So we all started out in the MTC in the spring of 1983. There were 10 of us in our district in the MTC, plus we had 2 girls that were with our group, but they were going to Indiana, as I recall. But since we were all going through an English-speaking program, they came along with us. And I don't recall who the guy teacher was, but we had a girl teacher named Tammy Lloyd. And I think that probably every one of us boys, the 10 of us elders, had a secret crush on Tammy. She was really pretty. And I think everybody thought deep down inside that she liked them best. But anyway, she was a great teacher and expected a lot of us. And because of her and her teaching companion, whoever he was, I can't remember his name, we were able to learn really quickly. And of course, I'm talking about the discussions. Back in those days, we learned 6 or 7 discussions word for word, and that's what we used. And we had this kid from California. His name was Mike Sorensen. And right off the bat, Sorensen displayed his smart alecky behavior, kind of his personality. He was a city kid. And Chad nicknamed him Gilligan after Gilligan's Island. And incidentally, Sorensen became our district leader. And so we had this smart aleck kid trying to be our leader. And he did the best job he could, but, you know, you can only put up with city kids and their weird little behaviors so long before you feel like slapping him around. But we all tried to get along with him as best we could. I just felt sorry for his companion. I can't even remember who it was, but he must have had the patience of Job. Incidentally, one of the funny things that happened with Sorensen, I really don't remember who did this, but it was funny nonetheless. Somebody snuck into Sorensen's dorm room there in the MTC, and he was sleeping on the top bunk, and right next to his mattress, where his pillow was an air vent. And whoever it was who pulled this little prank on Gilligan took the grate off the air vent and stuck an alarm clock back in there and set the alarm for 2 a.m. and then put the grate back on, screwed it in, and made everything look normal. And of course, the prankster notified all of Gilligan's roommates that there was an alarm that would be going off, so they better wear some earplugs. So they were all ready. And that alarm went off loud and clear at 2 a.m. And I think Sorensen just about blew a head fuse on that one. The next day, he came stomping into breakfast, and he was really mad. And I was standing there with my companion, this crazy Canadian, Elder Morrison, and Gilligan stomped up. "Whoever put the alarm clock by my bed is going to be killed," Morrison said in his laid-back Canadian accent. "Oh, Gilligan, that would really hurt." Anyway, we had a good laugh over that, except for Gilligan. He just about cried over it. He was pretty upset about that deal, but he got over it eventually. Took him a year and a half or so. Now, Boxing Day was when any of the elders who wanted to would put on the gloves and actually box each other. Full contact. And this particular day, our assistant to the president, I don't remember the guy's name, but he was from Roy, Utah, took on Nonu, my companion. Now, let me give you the mental picture of this. Nonu was about, 5'10", but he was solid muscle, probably weighed 220, maybe 30 pounds, 230 probably. And like I said, he was solid, like you would expect a Samoan to be. And this guy from Roy, the assistant to the president, the AP, was this tall, lanky guy. Figured he was a good boxer, and this was his day to take on Nonu. So Elder Liausa was the referee. He was the other Samoan in the group. And we cleared the furniture out in the middle of the living room in our little apartment, this second floor. And Nonu and this AP went to town. Liausa had this little makeshift whistle, and he stood there and reffed while Nonu and this AP beat the living crap out of each other. And I should say the AP got the crap beat out of him, because I don't think the guy even touched Nonu. I could tell right off, I knew a little bit about boxing, I could tell right off Nonu was a good boxer. He knew a lot. He had good technique, and he just put his arms up over his face, and that AP just wailed away at his elbows and forearms, and until Nonu got tired of that, and then put a 3 or 4 punch combination together and knocked this AP out. The AP was laying on the floor for, maybe 10 seconds out cold. So try to imagine that. This is your first real day on your mission, and the AP and one of your companions is boxing, and the AP gets knocked out cold. That's how it started for us. And I know I had a little talk with Chad Hull about that, and asked him what he thought, and he just shook his head. I don't think he knew what to think, and I know I didn't. So it wasn't all boxing. That evening, Nonu said, "Hey, Hicks, let's go teach." And Kegler, who I think, as I recall, was Chad's companion in the MTC, we all 4 went out together and did a little teaching. We found this guy and were able to teach the first discussion. And what was really funny about this, I'll never forget it. Kegler was teaching a part about Jesus Christ, and for some reason, he got the names Jesus Christ and Joseph Smith transformed in his mind, and so used Joseph Smith as the savior of the world. And fortunately, the guy we were teaching was drunk, and so he was sitting there with his head bobbing around, and he didn't remember a thing we said. But it was a good practice time, and we all kind of had a little chuckle over that, and I don't think Kegler ever made that mistake again. I was with Paul Apita for about a month and a half, and then it was his time to go home. And we wondered who was going to come out and take Pita's spot. I kind of hoped deep down inside that it would be Chad Hall. But, nobody knows anything until the day it happens. And sure enough, we got word that Hall would be flying out, and we needed to be at the airport to pick him up. And this would have been about the middle of June, as I recall, when he came out. And I'll never forget him, because they didn't have the new airport done. He flew into the old airport, which was an old Japanese airstrip. And that's an experience in and of itself, landing on that. Let me tell you about that. So what happens is, just before touchdown, the pilot comes on the intercom and tells everybody to get in the crash position. Pull your head down by your knees and hold your hands, clasp your hands behind your head. And I'm not kidding. And he puts the plane down and immediately hits the reverse thrust and the brakes. And so it throws you forward. And that's the reason for the crash position. And the plane comes to, and a big 737 comes to a complete halt on this fairly short runway with potholes the size of you'd lose your normal tires in. Anyway, so the plane came taxiing up to this little grass hut, which served as the terminal, the air terminal. And there was Chad Hall, walking off the stairs, coming down and walking across the tarmac to this grass hut to pick up his luggage. And we were standing there kind of waiting, excited to get a new elder. And I was letting everybody know. Obviously, Gilligan knew who Chad was, but Rich Lundy didn't. So I let him know Chad Hall's a great guy. You're going to like him, Lundy. He's from Alpine, and he's a Western guy. And he's a good guy. You'll like him. Anyway, Chad got off the plane. He had this briefcase in his hand. We thought, he must be bringing out a bunch of Book of Mormons or something. So we were all kind of wondering what he had in the briefcase. None of us had a briefcase like that. So when we got home, we were kind of excited when he flipped that briefcase open. He had probably maybe 100 cassette tapes along with the Walkman stereo. And I'll tell you what, we were kind of happy about that because none of us had any decent music. First time I stepped off the plane, when I went to Yap, there was 10 or 15 women sitting on the bench next to the little grass hut terminal. All of them had lavas or grass skirts on, and none of them had any shirts. Their chests were bare. And, it's interesting. I've had a lot of people ask how it was living around people who didn't wear clothes, or at least tops. And my answer's always been it really wasn't that difficult. When you live among people and that's what their custom is, it seems like you get used to that fairly quickly. In fact, coming home and seeing women wear regular clothes was probably more of a shock than actually going to the island and seeing that custom for the first time. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's just interesting how it works. And but we were happy to get Chad there with us, and we all worked together. We split up in companionships. Chad was to be my companion, and Lundy was to stay with Gilligan. In the first experience that Chad and I had together was going and building a house for this little guy named Baynoog. Baynoog was a crippled guy. He had a club foot that his toes poked straight out when he walked. His foot was kind of sideways. And so he couldn't get around very well. But he was a good guy. He was one of our members. Didn't have a family. He was single. And he was kind of the sub-chief in his village, and he needed a house built. His old house had fallen down. And so Chad and I agreed to go and help him out one Saturday to build his house. And we told him, have all the materials there, and we'll come and put everything together for you. And that's the day that I learned that Chad Hall was a really good builder. He had a mind for that kind of stuff. And I was really happy about that because it made the work go really quickly. So I had a little bit of experience myself. And so together he and I built that hut really quickly. But before we got started on the hut, we walked up, and there was Baynug sitting on a rock out in the middle of the jungle. And he was waving sticks around, chanting something when we came up. So we interrupted him, said, "Hey, Baynug, what are you doing?" He told us that he was asking the spirits when we were going to be there, because we were running a little bit late. And as you may have heard, the Yappies do a lot of black magic, and that's what Baynug was doing at that point. And I said, "Well, Baynug, what did the spirits tell you?" He said, "Well, those spirits told me you were going to be a little bit late, but you were on your way." I said, "Baynug, you're full of baloney. We didn't check in with any spirits before we left, so they have no idea what our schedule is." He said, "Oh, yes, they do. They know everything." And it occurred to me at that point in time that it's really tough to break people away from their traditions and customs, even though they profess their testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's really hard to get them to leave those customs and forget about them. And black magic was one of those things that many of the people, especially the old-timers on the island, couldn't seem to get rid of. Anyway, Chad and I looked at each other and kind of smiled and went to work. We sunk 4 posts in the ground, tamped them in with some mud and rocks. And then we toe-nailed a little floor, put some cross members about 2 or maybe 2.5 feet up off the ground, and nailed some old split bamboo to make a floor. We did the same thing with the roof. And then we nailed some old corrugated tin to the sides and top. And altogether, it took us about 3, maybe 4 hours to get that house built. And we did it all with a bunch of rusty nails and an old ball-peen hammer with a broken handle. And when we got done, we stepped back and looked at it. It looked really kind of nice. Probably about like a cool fort that some 10 or 11-year-old kid would use. But Baynug, we looked over at him, he was crying. He said, "I have the nicest house in the village now." The next experience we had was, as far as teaching goes, was we got hooked up with this little family of people that had a little girl named Martina, and her it was either her cousin or her older brother, I don't recall. His name was Sam. And Chad and I taught those 2 kids. Their mother wasn't interested in the church, but she wanted her kids to listen to the lessons and to get baptized if they wanted to. And so Chad and I taught those kids all of the discussions, and we had to kind of pare the wording down to make it into story form so that they could understand it. But they loved that, and they loved the pictures. Little Martina was about 12 years old, and her brother Sam was, I think he was probably maybe 14. And in fact, if you see the picture of their baptism, that little girl is standing by me, and her brother is standing next to Chad. Anyway, they were Chad's and my first baptism together as companions. In fact, it's really cool because Martina ended up moving to the United States, and here about 5 or 6 years ago, I got a call on the phone, and it was her. And she brought her little family over and had dinner with my wife and I and talked about the old times. And her kids came up and were so happy that Chad and I had taught their mother, so that they could be members of the church. Their whole lives were changed when their mother was baptized and the family came into the church. And they're still living in the U.S. I keep in touch with them and see them on social media quite often, and we chat back and forth occasionally. And that's what it's all about, really. The essence of missionary work is bringing people into the gospel and seeing them stay and thrive and spread that gospel among their friends and family. What a blessing. Another experience that we had that was kind of funny, and I laugh about it now, and actually it was really funny back when it happened too. We had this Filipino family that the father was some kind of a scientist, and they lived in a really nice house up above Colonia and in a really pretty area. And they invited us to come over for dinner. So we all piled in our little pickup and went on over there. And we were sitting there waiting for food to be fixed, and chit-chatting and talking. And the little Filipino mother was making chicken and some other really good dishes for supper. And on her table was a bowl of boonie peppers. And I don't know if you've ever heard of boonie peppers. In fact, I hadn't before I went to Yap. And I don't know what their official name is. That's just what we called them on Yap. And according to somebody that told me a little bit more about those peppers, apparently they're some of the hottest peppers on earth. And I know that to be a fact, at least that they're hot, because just one seed from one of those peppers, if you put that on your tongue, it'll burn like somebody stuck a hot poker in your mouth. And I don't like hot food anyway, so they seem really hot to me. But our resident expert on peppers, Gilligan, went over there and was telling everybody how he loved peppers and could handle any pepper. It didn't matter how hot it was. And that Filipino lady looked at him and said, "Well, I don't think you better try those because they're hotter than anything in the United States." And Gilligan, of course, couldn't take that he didn't want to be bested. And so when we all sat down to dinner, he put on a show. I guess he figured he was going to let us all know how much of a pepper aficionado he was. And he reminded us that he ate peppers all the time in California, and even the hottest ones he could stand. Well, as he was yammering on, he grabbed a little pepper out of that bowl and stuck it in his mouth and started chomping on it. And, of course, Chad and me and Lundy were sitting there watching him intently, knowing that this was probably not going to go well. And to be entertained, I don't think we could have asked for anything better. Because suddenly, Gilligan's face went red, then it went kind of white, then it went back to red, and water started boiling out of his eyes, and he started frothing at the mouth. And I could tell that something seriously wrong was happening right in front of us. And it appeared like Gilligan was still breathing and getting air into his lungs, so none of us jumped up to help him because it was, I don't know, we were just boys and it was too entertaining, I guess. But Sorensen, old Gilligan, started panicking because I think he couldn't breathe anymore. And that pepper was so hot in his mouth that his whole body was reacting. And that Filipino lady screamed at him, "Get over to the sink and spit all that pepper out." And Gilligan jumped out of his chair and tipped his chair over and staggered over to the sink and spit whatever was left of the pepper into the sink. In the meantime, the little Filipino lady grabbed something out of her fridge. Looked like milk, but I don't think it was. Maybe it was coconut milk or something like that. I don't know. But she went over and grabbed Sorensen by the hair and tipped his head back and dumped that white liquidy stuff down his throat and told him, "Swish around in your mouth and then spit it in the sink." And so they did that 3 or 4 times, and it appeared like Sorensen got his senses back and was able to get air into his lungs again. And he came over, sat down at the table, kind of put his head down and didn't say another word the rest of the night. It was the best evening we had so far. Anyway, I think back on that and have to laugh. And I wish Chad was sitting here next to me because we'd have another really good laugh over that. That's a good memory. And, you know, it wasn't good to see somebody suffering. But when you got some smart aleck like Gilligan, who thinks he knows everything and is claiming to be the big pepper guy, it was kind of funny to see him brought down to earth. We had some people that lived out in the village, out in Thole, that were friends of some of our members. And in fact, the mother was the sister of one of our really good members of our little branch. And their names were Ben and Maria Limchig. And Ben, I could tell right off, really liked Chad. In fact, they seemed to hit it off really well. Chad was a good athlete and was good at volleyball and basketball, which were 2 of the most popular sports on Yap. And Ben was a good athlete. And so Ben naturally gravitated toward Chad, and they became good friends. And so it wasn't hard to segue into our missionary lessons with those 2. And within just a few lessons, they were ready to be baptized. But we taught them the rest of, all 6 or 7 lessons. And before we could baptize them, we had to marry them. They weren't married. And incidentally, the Yapese don't have a formal marriage custom. If they get married, Yapese style, they just move in together and have kids. And if they get sick of each other, the mother usually kicks the husband out, and the kids, like in the U.S., probably stay with her. But interestingly, the kids all take the mother's name, whether, the marriages work or not. So doing genealogy, it's matriarchal rather than patriarchal when it comes to the Yapese family trees. But anyway, back to Maria and Ben. They were what you would consider a golden couple as far as baptism went. And they really did well with the lessons. In fact, they committed to read the Book of Mormon, and they both did. And we talked about it, and they asked searching, deep questions, and we had some great discussions with them. And I think it was really good for them, and especially Ben, being the head of the house, to be such good friends with Chad, because he was able to help Ben understand what his role as the husband should be in his home. We got ourselves into a real fix one night, and it could have cost us our lives, but thankfully we were spared, probably saved. Let me tell you what happened. So we had gone out to Baynug's village. Remember, Baynug is the guy who we built his house for him. We'd gone out to his village and visited with him, and then we saw some other people in that area. And when we were leaving, it was about, 5 or 6 o'clock maybe. And somebody came up to us on the road there as we were getting in our pickup and said, "Hey, Mormons, our car broke down. I wondered if you could come and help me and my friends get to our village." And Chad and I looked at each other, and Chad gave that shrug like, "Yeah, whatever." And so we said, "Yeah, we'll help you out." And this guy said, "Okay, we're just down the road here. Our car broke down, and if you could come pick us up." So we all went down there, and there was about 5 or 6 guys who jumped into the back of our pickup, and away we went. And they lived in a village that was kind of out in an area of the island that we normally didn't go very often. As we were driving out, maybe 2 miles after we picked these guys up, we noticed that they were back in the back of our pickup drinking. And in addition to drinking, they were sitting there sharpening their machetes. Every one of these guys had knives and machetes. We looked at each other and really thought nothing of it. All the islanders carried machetes. But after another mile or so, these guys got pretty rowdy. And then they got mean and angry and started cursing us and everything to do with the Mormons. And then a little bit further, they got more wild and started making death threats, telling us things like, when we get to the village, we're going to chop you guys up and feed you to the fish. We're going to throw you in the ocean. Nobody will ever see you again. Things like that. And we had no reason to believe that they wouldn't do that. And we really didn't know these guys very well. And the guy that came up to us to ask for the ride was kind of a friend of a friend. So we didn't know what to think. And Chad was kind of silent. I wasn't saying much. But suddenly, Chad looked over at me and said, "Hicks, we better decide what we're going to do when we get out to these guys' village, because it's going to be nip and tuck. There could be some serious problems." And I agreed to that. Since I was driving, he looked back and started picking out the ones that he was going to take when we stopped and if they attacked us, which we figured they would based on what they were saying, all the threats they were yelling and screaming at us. We hoped that, we could lock the doors to the car and use the cab of the pickup as protection. But you never know. In an isolated village out in the middle of the jungle on a island like Yap, you don't know what could happen. If they busted the windows before we could get out of their reach, things could get pretty dicey. Anyway, we kept driving because we figured if we stopped and ordered them out of our pickup, we'd have to fight them there. So we just kept driving. And all the way they were pounding on the roof of the truck and, screaming their threats at us. And I think both Chad and I said at least one little prayer. And at this time I thought about something that came up in my patriarchal blessing. And there was a little phrase that said something about me being blessed on my mission and protect it from any harm as I traveled by land, air, and sea. And I thought about that and thought, well, hopefully that's talking about this moment, and hopefully I'll have that protection, and so will Hall. And after I gave that some thought and said a little prayer, this peaceful feeling came over me, and I know that Chad mentioned that he had peace, knowing that things were going to turn out all right. And so we got into these guys' village, and we turned in off the main dirt road into this little isolated area, and the drive area into the village was surrounded kind of like a canopy of hibiscus and other really thick brush and trees. And so it was kind of like driving into a cave, and by this time it was pitch black, so all we could see is what was out in front of us in the headlights. And we went down this little, what seemed like a cave, into the village, and all the guys were hooting and hollering and carrying on in the back of the truck. Suddenly we came into an opening, and I turned the truck around and came to a stop and realized that nobody was in the back of our pickup anymore. This was just a little Toyota pickup, so 5 guys jumping out of the pickup, you'd think that we would have known from, the movement of the pickup that they were jumping out, but we didn't feel anything. But there was absolutely nobody in the back of the pickup. So I shoved it into first gear and sped out of there as fast as I could. We didn't see anybody the whole way out and the whole way home. And here's the interesting thing. We didn't see any of those guys again the rest of our missions. I thoroughly enjoyed working with Chad. He was a great guy, great missionary. Like I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Lundy, every missionary uses their own unique talents and abilities to reach the people. Lundy was a musician. Chad was a professional Western guy. He could reach people like Ben Limchig because of his personality. He wasn't pushy. He was the kind of guy who could just sit and visit with somebody and not jam the gospel down their throat, but teach them. He could teach them lessons as they were visiting, and the person wouldn't even realize they were being taught. That was Chad's contribution, and he reached a lot of people and influenced a lot of people on Yap. And I'm sure that people, in addition to Maria and Ben and some of the other folks out there in that village where they lived, where most of our members lived, they will be forever grateful for that time that we all spent out there working amongst them.